Hello. Everybody hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Ben.
Good evening.
Got me? Okay. Oh, man, I'm having some mic issues.
Sound good.
All right, thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. It is 6 o'clock, so we will call this meeting of the Santa Barbara County Citizens Independent Redistricting Commission to order. Ms. Tilton, would you please do a roll call?
Commissioner Trotsky. I'm sorry.
Present.
Present, okay. Commissioner Twibell,
Present.
Commissioner McClintock,
Present.
Vice Chair Turley,
Present.
Commissioner Bradley,
Present.
Commissioner Bray,
Present.
Commissioner Ochoa,
Present.
and Janet Rios. Commissioner Janet Rios has a conflict for tonight, so she's excused. Commissioner Olmedo
Present.
and Chair Morris.
Present. Before we get into the public or the approval of the minutes and then the public comment, I wanted to just remind those who are observing the meeting and participating in the public of items 2 and 3 on the agenda. These are informational items. The first one, item 2, is discusses the ex parte communications reporting of the commissioners. Remind everyone that there is a master form that is available on the County of Santa Barbara's redistricting website, where the public can view reported ex parte discussions. And similarly, on that same website, there is
I
a
guess
link.
we'll have to share too. Oh, sorry.
Yep, there's also a link on that same website for individuals to recommend community organizations that they believe would be good outreach partners or candidates for the commission to engage over the next several months as we move through this process. Would encourage anyone from the public who believes who knows of an organization we should be contacting to use that form to connect us, and our staff will reach out and begin that process. With that, commissioners, the next item would be the approval of our minutes from our April 21st meeting. If there are no corrections or additions, I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Commissioner Bray moves. Is there a second? Commissioner McClintock and several others. So with that, Ms. Tilton, could you take a roll call again?
Yes, Commissioner Trotsky,
Aye.
Commissioner Twibell,
Aye.
Commissioner McClintock,
Aye.
Vice Chair Turley,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Bray,
Aye.
Commissioner Ochoa,
Aye.
Commissioner Olmedo,
Aye.
Chair Morris.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to public comment. This portion of our public comment is for items not appearing on our agenda. And before I ask Ms. Tilton to explain the process, I would just also remind people, everyone, that written communication that was received by the deadline or shortly thereafter was posted this afternoon to the website in the same areas where the agenda and meeting packet are posted. And those items will be acknowledged as well. So Ms. Tilton, could you explain to folks how we will conduct our public comment period and lead us through that exercise, please?
Yes, today's meeting is remote, virtual only through the Zoom webinar information identified on the public agenda. The meeting is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the internet at www.countyofsb.org/redistricting.sbc. Public participation during the meeting can only be done through the Zoom webinar link or by calling the phone number provided on the agenda. For those using the Zoom webinar link, please indicate that you wish to speak during public comment by selecting the raise your hand feature. Attendees by phone can raise your hand by pressing *9. When called upon, please state your name for the record. We do reserve the right to mute a microphone for profane, harassing, or offensive language, or for speaking beyond the time limit set. The time limit for public comment is set at 3 minutes. Recordings of the commission meetings, agendas, supplemental materials, and minutes of the commission are available on the internet at the same redistricting webpage cited earlier at www.countyofsb.org/redistricting.sbc.
So again, I would remind everybody that at this moment, we'd like to take public comment related items not on tonight's agenda. We will have public comment opportunities associated with the action items that come on the agenda later. So Ms. Tilton, anyone raising their hand?
Yes, we have 2 requests to speak. One from Mr. Bell and the other one from and then following that will be Lata Murty.
Good evening, Mr. Bell.
Good evening, Chair Morris and commissioners. My name is Charles Bell, law firm of Bell, McAndrews and Hilltack. I'm commenting, one, to thank you for posting the public comment in the public comment materials that were just posted today. My letter of April 21st, which concerned the vacancy that was opened up per the announcement of Commissioner Hudley's resignation. Actually, it's posted twice because it wasn't posted, it wasn't received timely. You referred to it in your remarks at the last meeting. I noticed that it hadn't been posted and requested you and Ms. Orden to accomplish that, and I appreciate the promptness with which you did so. And so it's there twice, easy to find in the public comments. It's not duplicative, it's the same letter. And so with that, thank you. I will address that item when you get to item number 8.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Lata Murthy.
Evening, Dr. Murdy. Oh, you've muted.
Oh, I thought I had unmuted. Sorry about that. Good evening, Chair Morris and Commissioners. I just wanted to express my appreciation for addressing the concern that I brought up in a public comment for the last meeting about making sure to emphasize the form that's available on the Redistricting Commission's website for members of the public to suggest community-based organizations for outreach. I really appreciate that. I think it's really important. And I hope by announcing that at the beginning of meetings that you will get some great suggestions for organizations to reach out to. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I don't see additional hands raised. I can go ahead and read the public comments, the written comments that were submitted, and then we can see if any other hands raised. Huge.
Please.
Okay.
Please, thank you.
So on April 21st, 2021, as mentioned by Charles Bell, letters received from him on behalf of the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce regarding the replacement of former Commissioner Hudley and underrepresentation of Hispanics. On May 3rd, 2021, from Sadie Stern requesting that the land that is titled to the First Nation of Coastal Central Southern California, designated for Indigenous people, be recognized as its own district. On May 4th, 2021, Robert Mercado regarding Commissioner Hudley's replacement and underrepresentation of the Latino community, and recommended an appointment be made from District 3. And then after the deadline, we received a correspondence from Robin Sertisley on May 4th, hoping that District 3 boundaries are changed so everyone has a voice and a vote, and referred to partisanship in the selection of the law firm and the commissioners. And then on May 5th, from Charles Bell, a requesting that his April 21st letter be distributed. And that is all. And I do not see additional hands raised.
Okay, very well. Thank you for that. We will close that portion of the public comment, and we'll move on the agenda. Bulk of our meeting this evening is going to be some additional training presentations by the Asian American Advancing Justice Organization and the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund. Ms. Tilton, are you introducing this item, or who's going to kick it off?
Yes, I am. Give me just a moment here. Thank you. Actually, I'm going to need to put you on pause for just a minute. I'm sorry here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having some computer freezing problems. I'm sorry. With us today is Stephen Ochoa with MALDEF and Sarah Rohani representing the Asian Americans Advancing Justice League, as well as I believe we were expecting Julia. Oh, and Julia Marks. There you are. Thank you. Also from the Asian American Advancing Justice. And I apologize, I had some bios, but I am unable to get that up on my screen. So if you could do a quick self-introduction. And we thank you very much for being here and for presenting to the Commission regarding voter rights from the perspective of both of your organizations. So I know that the three of you were collaborating on your presentation. And so if we can go ahead and unmute your mics, and then whoever is prepared to go first, then we're ready for you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. My name is Julia. I'll start us off. And Sarah generously is running slides for all three of us. So I'll do a quick introduction, and then Sarah, if it's possible for you to share your screen and do slides, that would be great. So my name is Julia Marks. I'm a staff attorney at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus, which is based in San Francisco. I'm also the program manager for the voting rights team. So we're a civil rights organization that provides legal services.
Okay,
and
those are the closed
advocacy.
session ones.
Oh, pardon?
No, go ahead.
Am I good? Okay. This is public, so okay. Yeah, so our organization provides legal services and advocacy for Asian American Californians, and we particularly focus on immigrant communities, low-income communities, and other underserved APIs. So if it's okay with you guys, Sarah and Stephen, I'll just have you introduce yourselves when it's your portion of the presentation. I see that there's a challenge with the screen share. Do you want us to pause while we figure that out, or would you rather we just do a verbal presentation?
Give us just one moment and we're going to make
Okay.
this work. Who needs the, is it Sarah that needs the control?
Yes.
She should have control now.
Excellent. There we are.
Okay, great. So yeah, one of our program goals is to promote equal access to California's democracy. And so we really appreciate that you all have set aside this extra time for this training, and we appreciate that you reached out and have invited our organizations to speak. It's such an important issue, and we know you have a big challenging process ahead of you and want to do our best to make that easier and help kind of build out your knowledge and be responsive to questions you might have. So I'm just going to start us off with an overview of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or membership in a language minority group. I think it's important, before we get into some of the details of its application, to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture and reflect on its history. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed thanks to the long struggle and leadership of Black communities. We're fighting back against pernicious and pervasive racial discrimination in voting. This landmark legislation was essential to stopping a very wide range of exclusionary policies that states and local governments used to reduce the voting power of racial and ethnic minority groups and also language minority groups. And it's not just limited to the South, and it's not just limited to Black communities. Throughout America, we've had a long and dark history of exclusion of racial and linguistic groups from our voting process. And the VRA has been extremely important in helping to break down many of those barriers, from literacy tests to the unfair use of at-large voting systems to exclusionary language policies. And it's still used today to fight against policies that make it harder for communities of color and language minority communities to vote or to have an equal voice in our democracy because of the system of representation. And while the VRA has helped move our democracy forward significantly, we have not yet achieved the full promise of equal representation. And California continues to have voting systems that can create barriers for communities of color. And we still see disparate rates of participation in our elections. So it's really important that we use this redistricting cycle to make sure we get it right and make sure we're setting up really fair and equitable lines for our communities. So a key form of discrimination that the VRA protects against is the manipulation of district boundaries to dilute the vote of communities of color. So as you all know, you're on the commission, district boundaries have tremendous power and influence in either reducing or strengthening community voices. And so we want to be sure that voters' ballots are meaningful, that the communities have equitable voting power and that their voting power is not unfairly diluted. So the two most common ways of reducing a community's political power through line drawing are packing and cracking. So here are two overly simplified examples. Cracking is when you break up a community among multiple districts so that the community makes up a small portion of those districts. And then in none of those districts will they be a high enough portion of the voters to actually elect the candidates they prefer. So you've diluted their power through cracking them apart. Packing is when you group most of a community into just one district. So they only have the chance to really meaningfully affect one outcome in one district, even though they might be fairly populous and could have, in fact, if the lines were drawn differently, have an impact in, say, 2 districts or even more. So keep in mind that there's not a simple mathematical formula for this, and this is obviously an oversimplified example. But you'll want to, consider a bunch of different map variations to figure out, whether there is packing occurring. Maybe there's a map variation that would give more power to a minority community. And you'll also want to be really thoughtful about listening to community groups and consulting with attorneys and listening to other voting rights attorneys who might testify to your body to think about, what maps will actually be giving meaningful opportunities to the communities so that they can elect the candidates they prefer. Sorry, next slide. So Section 2 of the VRA prohibits vote dilution and will apply in a certain set of circumstances. So you can kind of go through these questions to assess whether Section 2 is implicated. If it is implicated, your job as a commission is to make sure you're drawing lines that are going to give the racial minority community at issue a majority of a district so they have a fair chance to elect the candidate of their choice. So this is like an affirmative assessment you need to do, and then an affirmative obligation to draw that Section 2 mandated district. So the key questions to go through are whether there's a racial minority group that's sizable and relatively concentrated, such that they could form the majority in a hypothetical district. And Stephen will talk a little bit more about the data you need to look at for that. But the redistricting data you'll get later this year is the basis of this piece of the analysis. And then you also need to look at whether that minority group is politically cohesive. So this isn't necessarily a partisan inquiry. You're just asking whether they tend to vote for the same candidates or similar ballot measures. It's not that they need to always vote exactly in lockstep, but most of the time, do they vote for the same candidates or issues? Then you also need to look at whether they vote differently than the majority group. And that's where the dilution comes into play, where you've broken a community up such that they actually don't get to effectively elect the candidates they prefer because the other groups are voting in a way that's different from their preference. And then finally, there's a more kind of like big picture inquiry that looks at a whole bunch of different factors about historic discrimination, present discrimination, the extent of discrimination in voting, but also the extent of exclusion in other areas of society, such as education or business, and questions about the exclusion of minorities in past elections, in the candidate slating, and who you see in primaries. So you're doing a multifaceted analysis of whether there's discrimination at play in your jurisdiction. And if you go through these questions and the answer is yes to all of them, then you need to make sure that you're drawing a Section 2 district that has a majority of that group so that those folks can elect a candidate of their choice. Next slide. Oops, sorry. So an important reminder here is that Section 2 applies even if the decision makers do not intend to discriminate on the basis of race. So that's why earlier I mentioned that this is a proactive thing that you guys need to be looking at throughout this process. As soon as you start putting together draft maps, VRA compliance should be kind of part of the thought process. Of course, you also can't discriminate intentionally on the basis of race, but intention is not required to have a VRA issue in play. So I also wanted to note that VRA is a really important tool, but it doesn't always protect minority communities' voting power, especially with API communities, where we might be a smaller percentage of the population or be more geographically diffuse through an area. Section 2 won't necessarily apply, right? Because the API folks might not make up the majority situations, it's really important to remember VRA is just a starting point. It's necessary to do VRA analysis and it's necessary to comply with the VRA. But we also strongly urge you to see the VRA as a floor. It's not everything you're doing. So look beyond it too, and think about if there are ways that communities could have their voice strengthened or if communities are being broken up. And so later on in this presentation, Sarah Rohani will talk a bit more about communities of interest and how that can overlap with a respect for racial minority groups' voting power. And that goes beyond the VRA. So just please keep in mind that this is a holistic analysis in addition to a mathematical analysis at times. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Stephen Ochoa from MALDEF, who will provide a little more detail on the data side of VRA analysis.
Good evening. Thanks, Julia. My name is Stephen Ochoa. I'm MALDEF's National Redistricting Coordinator. I am not a MALDEF attorney. I am MALDEF's demographer. This is going to be my third cycle, so I have been drawing MALDEF maps for quite a bit and drawing them on behalf of the Latino community. MALDEF was founded in 1968, and and voting rights and redistricting have been have been something we have advocated for since our founding, and something we have participated in every redistricting cycle since our founding. MALDEF, we call ourselves the lawyers for the Latino community, and we have a very strong civic engagement and political access component to our organization. And we conduct a national redistricting program. We have four regional offices with our headquarters in Los Angeles, along with offices in San Antonio, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. And so we participate in redistricting nationally on behalf of the Latino community and advocate for respect for the Latino community and with a specific eye for compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. So I say that I'm a demographer because that means I'm not an attorney. So I don't want to spend so Julia was wonderful and gave the quick overview, the legal overview of the VRA. But next slide, please. But I wanted to kind of focus a little, take it back a little bit more holistic. I wanted to go over the redistrict. I wanted to approach this in a different way, like go over the redistricting criteria that you have in front of you and actually just kind of say, what are the data or what are the information you need to satisfy all these criteria? So you can start seeing the big picture of where things also link up. And so next slide, please. So, so as you see, these are probably criteria you hopefully have memorized by now, but these are the criteria that you will be given that as you draw your county. And California law has them specifically ranked. Even if they were not specifically ranked, big rules number 1 and 2 in redistricting are we call the equal population rule. Sometimes it's called the 1 person, 1 vote rule. And then big rule number 2 is compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. And then afterwards, we have some other traditional redistricting criteria that California law has ranked for you. Contiguity, maintaining neighborhoods and COIs, preserving cities and cities and census designated places, boundaries and compactness. But we'll go next slide. But I wanted to kind of like overview what information do you actually need to satisfy each of these criteria that you have in front of you. And so so that's where I wanted to approach this. So when you're going for big rule number 1, equal population, this data source is the census redistricting data. It's also called the PL 94-171, which is public law. And that's just the official term. So when the data is released, at this point, the legacy formatted data will be, I guess, set for release in August 16th. And then the formatted version will come out in around September 30th from the Census Bureau. But these data will be first generated by the Census Bureau. But then in California, we are going to have what's called adjusted dates, PL data. And California is going to reallocate prisoners to their original residence to the best of their ability. And so that is the data set we encourage all to use in California. And so the the California statewide database, which and their website is listed here. They will be the public group that will be reallocating, adjusting the census data, and that'll take them about maybe a week or a month after the data is released, and then that is the official data you will get to use for equal population balancing. What do you need to satisfy the Federal Voting Rights Act? Lots of things. As Julia eloquently pointed out, there are lots of components to satisfying the Federal Voting Rights Act, but you're going to use a mix of redistricting data for total population. You're going to be using what's called citizen voting age population, CVAP. I'll be saying that acronym a lot, citizen voting age population, CVAP, which will come from the Census's American Community Survey. And then you're going to be using election data. That's what you'll be needing to conduct your racially polarized voting analysis. Voting implies election data. And then public testimony. All of these in aggregate will go into your analyses for compliance with Federal Voting Rights Act. Next slide. So I just want to spend a little bit more detail into the first two rules. So one person, one vote. This is why we have to go with the redistricting every cycle. The districts are now out of balance at minimum. They have to at minimum be reset to equal population. You are redistricting with total population, every man, woman, child, citizen, non-citizen alike, and you need to use the PL 94 redistricting data to do this. And this data again will come out in August and September. Next slide. How do you know you're complying with the equal population rule? If you haven't been told about this, basically you take your jurisdiction's population. In this case, you're taking Santa Barbara's total population will be, via the ACS, it was about 445,000 people. And you have 5 districts, 5 supervisorial districts, so divide that by 5. And that's what you'll come up with your ideal population size. And then your goal is to draw the districts as close to those ideal populations as possible. There are some allowances, for how exact you can get. It's very, you're rarely going to get round numbers like this example in front of you. But essentially, the closer to equal population you can, the better. And ultimately, when you finish your draft plan, you're going to look at the highest ideal, the highest populated district and the lowest population district, and you're going to calculate the difference. And that difference is often called a deviation from ideal. And you'll have a negative number and a positive number, and you'll take the absolute difference, so the high and the low, and you'll get a range. And that is how you calculate your deviation range. And usually when in redistricting, you're talking about a deviation range percentage. You have more leeway usually for a local jurisdiction. Congressional redistricting at this point is often considered very strict. Many jurisdictions believe you have to get to 1 person deviation, total person. Usually if you're under a 10% deviation rate for local, that could be usually considered compliant. If you're at 26% total deviation, you're probably going to be called malapportioned, and violating big rule number 1 of redistricting. Consult your attorneys, but that is, roughly that's how you kind of start looking at the equal population rule. I mean, what is your planned deviation? And again, these are data from the PL 94-171 data for your census redistricting data. Next slide. I also just wanted you to know some key population terms. If you don't know some of these distinctions. Total population, that's your census total population. That's everyone, man, woman, child, citizen, non-citizen alike. VAP, voting age population, is often referenced in redistricting. That's basically anyone that's 18 and over. So I'll say VAP sometimes, or not again, I'll say CVAP, which is the citizen voting age population. That's anyone 18 and over and a citizen. In theory, that's like the entire eligible universe of potential registered voters, because who can register to vote in our country? Citizens that are 18 and over. So those are key population terms to know. And then particularly when we start talking about voting rights analysis, you need to start understanding registration and votes cast data. What is the registration of the jurisdiction? That's who is registered to vote. That's data you'll get from your election officials or the statewide database. And then the votes cast data, you can these election officials will kind of can actually tell you at least who cast a ballot, who the individual that cast a ballot. So you'll kind of you can get a figure of ballots cast, or sometimes it's called votes cast. And for election data, at least in California, for Latinos and Asians at least, we can apply what's called a surname dictionary match to estimate the Latino and Asian demographics of registered voters. Our registration cards in California do not ask for your race and ethnicity when you fill it out. So when you want to get the demographics of your registration universe and your ballots cast universe, at least for Latinos and Asians, you often have to apply surname analyses to the name list. And that's how you estimate your registration, your Latino registration or Asian registration. Sometimes I'll call it Spanish surname voter registration. But these are important distinctions to know, because when you have to start looking for voting rights analysis, you need to understand the demographics of not only the potential district you're drawing for the total VAP or CVAP, but you also need to know some of the demographics of the registration and the votes cast data, because you have to start eventually looking at effectiveness. So next slide. So this Julia had also had a slide like this, where she basically listed what are called the tests for voting rights compliance. When do you have to draw a majority district? There's 3 tests. So the next slide, there are 3 questions in order. So the first question is, can you draw a district where the minority group you're trying to study is a majority of the district? And in this instance, you're going to look, so you will draw a district for total population, so approximately 89,000 people in Santa Barbara. And then after you draw that 89,000 person district or so, you're going to look at the CVAP within that district, right? And are the Latinos, in this instance, let's say, for example, Latinos, are they 50% of the CVAP population in that your draft district? Then if the answer is yes, okay, you potentially could draw, that's step 1. If they're not, then that's a question. So the first rule as you are drawing is asking your demographer, are there any districts in Santa Barbara that you can draw that are over 50% Latino CVAP in this instance, in this example? Or are there more than one? We'll get to that in a second, packing versus cracking. So that's your first question. And you need PL redistricting data to get your equal population down. And then you need ACS data, because this is where the CVAP information comes from. So it's actually 2 separate census data that you kind of have to merge together to satisfy this first part of the first question in voting in Section 2 compliance. Next slide. The next 2 questions, when taken together, are what we call racially polarized voting. Do the minorities vote consistently in a certain way? And do the non-minorities, the other people in the district, vote a different way and always work to defeat their candidates of choice? So together, these 2 questions are called racially polarized voting, or RPV. And how you prove RPV is you need election results, and then you need to match demographics of the group that you're interested in studying to those election results. These election results at precinct level. And think of it this way: if on old schools, there's different ways to eloquently explain it, but conceptually, you are matched. You kind of look at high Latino precincts or high Asian precincts. How did those precincts vote for candidates? Then low percentage district or precincts, and how did the group vote? And if there's kind of like a line, a pattern, like you can start proving some racial polarized voting. Then you look at the other way, right? For the majority of the other population. So you need to match demographics, ideally surname registration or surname votes cast data to your election results. If you don't have surname data, then you start using census data. You pair these data, and you put these data into the precinct level, because our precincts tell you only election results, who won, candidate X or candidate Y. They don't tell us the demographics, right? We have a secret ballot. So you kind of have to go back and try to imply how these folks work. And that's what these racially polarized voting analysis studies do. And that's what you need to, those are the data that you need to conduct these, and you want to look at specific elections. Next slide. And then finally, there, as Julia said, there's a totality of circumstances. And this is like where you put everything together as well. So you have the demographic analysis, the election and RPV analysis. And this is where you also can have some testimony, can also supply some of this information. Are people telling you, you know what, we've been consistently ignored by candidate X or candidates X and Y and Z historically through this district or these regions. We have trouble situating many of the elements of communities of interest can sort of, you know, help tell the story. What is the whole story of this community as well? Putting it all together, you know, though, it is what you need to comply to kind of comply with VRA analyses. Next slide. So those are the big rules, 1 and 2. After that, you know, they have other rules. They're very much more simple to understand. You know, contiguity is your district in one piece, and you know, you just need a map or your GIS software can look at a map saying, all right, it's the district I drew in one piece. You know, your next criteria is maintaining neighborhoods and communities of interest. Sarah's going to get into this in much more detail, but this really comes from your public testimony. All the hearings that the many hearings that hopefully you're going to set up to allow people to give their input on what their communities of interest are. Preserving cities or census designated place. There are census will you know, tracks your incorporated cities, but they also have what are called designated places. So say areas that are not really incorporated, say in your county, but you know, they're clear like clear, you know, population centers in your region. But from a census demographer standpoint, they're kind of the same thing. But the criteria is, you know, are you splitting these cities and census designated places? You need a map or GIS software to tell you that. Following natural or artificial boundaries. So a natural boundary is like a mountain range, or you know, an artificial boundary is like a freeway or a major road. You know, Main Street versus side street A. You know, is the community being divided by a wash or a canal? Those are potential artificial boundaries. You know, these are, you know, and a map or GIS software was used to help you determine if you're meeting that criteria. And then compactness, that's basically the shape of the district. You use a map or GIS software. You know, compactness is basically, you'll know it when you see it type of criteria. There are various mathematical formulas for compactness. None of them are really perfect. You know, I wouldn't get stuck on any of them there, you know, but your software can generate some of those. But it really, for redistricting, it's really you know when you see it. There's no like one standard on compactness measures. And that's it. These are all basically these are the data points and the tools you'll need to satisfy your criteria as you draw. That's it. I think that's it for me. And I will now popcorn over to Sarah.
Thank you very much. My name is Sarah Rohani. I'm an attorney with Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Los Angeles. And I'm going to be discussing best practices and communities of interest predominantly. So first, to ensure that you're able to comply with both the Voting Rights Act and drawing maps more generally, you must remember to ask a lot of questions, listen to community input, look at a range of map options. And finally, you need to remember that both the Voting Rights Act and communities of interest take precedence over other criteria. You may end up with an odd shape or a district that crosses a highway in an unexpected way, but that is okay and often necessary. So the definition of a community of interest is demonstrated right here. Communities of interest are the core of public input. They're the base for drawing larger districts and putting maps together generally. So state law defines a community of interest as a population that shares common social or economic interests that should be included within a single supervisorial district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. Examples of communities of interest, my apologies. These are some examples of communities of interest. A community of interest is a group of people who just simply share a common interest. It can be language, values, culture, history, And elements to consider when defining your local communities of interest are shared interests such as good schools, transit issues, crime, housing issues, healthcare, environmental justice or land use issues. Or a community of interest may be centered around common social or civic networks or socioeconomic status related to homeownership and education levels. Or it may even be a combination of those things, a portion of the county with an agricultural economy that's distinct from the county's population centers. So for example, if there's a neighborhood where there are a lot of people who are limited English proficient and they speak a certain language, being kept together in a single district would help them hold their elected official accountable for providing appropriate language support in their office and helping secure good language access and other services. If many residents in a certain area are employed within a similar industry, they will be more able to elect someone who has a good understanding of their interests and concerns if they are kept together. And additionally, under California law, a community of interest cannot include a shared relationship with political parties or political candidates. And most importantly, communities of interest are defined by the residents. There is no formula to decide what is and is not a community of interest. Ultimately, it's a judgment call about who the important groups of people are in your community and whether it is possible to keep them together when drawing district lines. This is why it is so important to receive public input to determine which communities are most in need of representative districts, using best practices to ensure that these underrepresented communities can be part of a process that will affect their day-to-day lives for the next decade. So this is an example of a proposed map for Assembly District 31. This type of input about communities of interest is especially important for AAPI communities in statewide redistricting because our population may not have the numbers or the density to make up the majority of an assembly, senate, or congressional district, but we can still fight to keep our communities whole as lines are drawn. So here, the Latino VRA district could have been drawn in a way that split the neighborhood or group them with one of the other adjacent districts where their interests were less aligned with the larger population. The Hmong community members uplifted the fact that their community should be kept whole, but also that they share many policy interests with the Latino community due to many similar socioeconomic characteristics. So moving on to best practices to engage the community and get adequate input and ensure that the process is transparent and fair and inclusive, it's important to engage in an extensive amount of outreach. So under state law, in order to engage these underrepresented and non-English speaking communities in our redistricting process, counties have to make a good faith effort to share information about the local redistricting process with media organizations, including ethnic and non-English media organizations. Additionally, you must share information via good government, civil rights, civic engagement, and community groups and organizations that are active in the jurisdiction. And this includes groups that are actively involved in language minority communities. So in order to maximize the number of residents that are informed about the redistricting process, a jurisdiction should produce outreach and publicity materials and distribute them as widely as possible through a variety of channels. It's important to overwhelm and inundate the community and to start early with your outreach. Redistricting is a very technical and dry topic that does not come naturally to most people. So, however, it's a process that makes a significant difference in people's lives. So, to ensure that public can participate, they need to hear about the issue over and over and over again until they actually will get involved. So it's important to start as early as possible. While obviously the delay in census data has caused significant issues, you actually have several months to be able to do education in the community in advance of the delivery of that data so that people know what redistricting is and how they can get involved once the data comes in. And a successful map drawing body should hear from all communities and neighborhoods within a jurisdiction, regardless of language abilities, resources, or previous engagement in local politics. Simply publicizing the process on the jurisdiction's website and in a small number of newsletters and community newspapers is not enough. You should spread the word about your work in local newspapers in various languages, at meetings of local community groups, in multilingual robocalls, on digital marquees at local schools, and in flyers sent home with school children, and so on. So in addition to formal public hearings, the Commission should host educational and information gathering workshops in the community to help residents identify priority communities of interest and be able to draw them on a map. So in order to do this, we recommend using social media, but beyond Facebook, Twitter, and Nextdoor, the regular platforms, we recommend also using platforms that are primarily used by limited English proficiency communities, such as WhatsApp and WeChat, and translating materials as necessary. Another way to effectively reach out to the community is to partner with community leaders, such as religious leaders. And particularly during COVID, it is important also to engage in non-digital outreach, particularly for communities with low access to technology. So examples of this type of non-digital outreach would be presentations to community groups and perhaps mailers with translations that are sent to every household. Lastly, the Commission should also gather public input outside of hearings. The commission members or staff can attend community events such as festivals or farmers markets in order to meet the community where they are. And you can also engage in other processes such as issuing hearings and distributing them via social media. So as some people will inevitably be unable to attend hearings due to family or work obligations, you can still be able to get their input through such a digital survey. So moving on to hearings, state law requires a minimum of 4 hearings total, and at least 1 during the first phase and at least 2 during the second. So 4 meetings are likely inadequate for a county the size of Santa Barbara, and holding more hearings would provide community members with multiple opportunities to contribute, and it would enable them to participate before the adoption of maps, even if they learn about redistricting late in the process. And these hearings can be conducted without census data. And of course, the delay makes it all the more important to provide the public with this greater opportunity to help shape the process before the county commits to a map. In order to do this, the Commission should hold all hearings in the evening and even on weekends so that standard work hours aren't a barrier. If meetings are in person, hearings should be held in different parts of town so that transportation is not a barrier. And all locations should also be accessible via public transit and ADA compliant. If the hearings are virtual, we recommend dedicating hearings to specific regions so as to avoid residents from one part of the county drowning out voices of other residents. Ideally, the county would hold 1 hearing in every existing district in order to ensure that all residents have a voice. So the law also requires 5 days notice of date, time, and location for any public redistricting hearing or workshops. Greater notice would provide more people the opportunity to arrange their schedules, prepare for the hearing, and present their testimony. As you can imagine, public testimony takes a long time to research and prepare. So greater than 5 days notice would provide a significant amount of more people to the opportunity to participate. And then with regards to recordings, although cities and counties may provide a written summary in place of an audio or audiovisual recording, posting a recording of hearings is helpful because it allows residents to follow mapping conversations and decisions more closely. And live streaming the processes also increases accessibility of redistricting meetings as people can watch from home in real time and potentially even virtually participate. Additionally, under state law, if a request is made at least 72 hours in advance, you must provide a live translation of public redistricting hearings or workshop in applicable languages. So for counties, those applicable languages refer to any language that the county must provide translated ballots in under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act. And lastly, we recommend that you accept written and verbal comment and do have simplified forms in order for people to sign up and participate in the public comment process. Turning to language access, a jurisdiction should prepare outreach and publicity materials in a variety of languages so that word about redistricting spreads to all the jurisdiction's language communities. Outreach materials, information publicizing upcoming redistricting workshops and hearings, and the designated website itself should be translated, and translated materials should be shared with civic, cultural, and community organizations, posted online, and sent to ethnic news media sources in print, web, and radio outlets. Ideally, these translated materials should be shared with leaders from the relevant language communities prior to their release in order to make sure they're accurate, accessible, and culturally competent. So that is a very quick summary of communities of interest and best practices for reaching those communities. If you have any questions, we're available for a Q&A currently, but if you have any questions after the fact, please feel free to reach us at this email address. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to the three of you for taking some time this evening to help us understand these issues more. Let me begin with our commissioners and see if anybody has any questions that they would like to bring to the group. I get the screens bouncing all over. Commissioner Turley, let's start with you.
Yes, first of all, thank you so much for being here. These were really informative presentations. I have a couple of questions so we can popcorn. But my first one is relatively simple. The CVAP, does that include people who are citizens but no longer eligible to vote due to felonies, or just people who are over 18 who are still eligible to vote?
That is everyone who is 18 and a citizen. So that would be inclusive of the incarcerated population.
Excellent. I have two other questions, but I'm happy to have other people go ahead of me, or
Probably simplest to just go through.
okay. I loved, Sarah, what you said about reaching non-English speaking populations. And I'm curious, I'm really not familiar with how to use WhatsApp and WeChat in particular in reaching out to people who are not part of my context. Is that specifically buying advertising space in those apps, or how would you recommend using those for outreach?
So in certain communities throughout the state, there are ethnic populations that have channels in WeChat and WhatsApp that are related usually to the neighborhoods. In Southern California, for example, in San Gabriel Valley, there are several community WeChat channels where individuals like engage in political activism and awareness about issues. And so that would be, that's what I was discussing. I'm not as familiar with paid advertisements on WeChat or WhatsApp. I believe that's the way.
Okay. And then WhatsApp has a similar channel function?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. And then were there any other recommendations for specifically reaching non-English speaking Asian American populations?
With regards to social media platforms?
I mean, I think generally, but if you have more specific examples, that would be helpful as well.
So I think generally it would just be those social media platforms, WeChat in particular for the Chinese community, and then ethnic media is very successful as well, right? Radio, print, and online.
Great, thank you.
Who's next? Mr. Bradley.
Thank you, all of you, for your presentations. And Ms. Rohani, I really enjoyed your specific recommendations. Those are very helpful. I wondered if you could also append what you'd said, given our pandemic circumstances. You've mentioned social media and that sort of thing, but based on your experience and the rest of the staff this evening, do you have any recommendations specifically for doing outreach during the pandemic lockdown, given the constraints we have with group sizes and closeness and venues, indoor versus outdoor? Can you make any additional recommendations to help us with that?
With regards to hearings, a hybrid model is very successful because it's able to incorporate, individuals who can come in person, as well as individuals who don't have access to technology and need to come to in-person meetings. So first and foremost, I think a hybrid model of hearings is very successful. And then I mentioned non-digital media strategies. I think there are, particularly in rural communities and areas with low access to technology, physical outreach would be most successful. So like mailers that are included in utility bills or some other type of physical mailer, as well as again, just engagement in media, as I mentioned. And Julia, if you have anything to add in addition to that as well.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. One more I'd toss out there is, folks are starting to gather in a variety of settings, hopefully in relatively small groups, but through, a religious institution or community center. So if there are ways you can leverage those existing meetings and interactions by kind of adding in a piece about redistricting to maybe a larger meeting, rather than asking people to come together simply to talk about redistricting. This is a strategy a lot of organizations used for census outreach last year, and we hope to see kind of continued forward into the redistricting context. There still needs to be time to have a somewhat robust conversation, since redistricting is much more complicated than the census, but we do think that model has promise here too.
Thank you.
Mr. Bray.
Thank you, Mr. Rahani. That was very, very interesting. I was just curious. We have a very large military installation here in North County, many of whose service members do live on base. Do you have any experience on how you reach out to a military community, specifically that's, considering the military is sometimes guarded on how they like to disseminate information?
I do not personally know the answer to that question. Julia, do you have experience with that?
No, I'm sorry, I can't say I do. A general principle we use is to try to find a group or two that's already organized in that context. Like we've used this on college campuses, and then ask them to give us extra tips to how to reach their broader community. So maybe there's a couple groups that you can start with who can give some insight.
I don't have experience either, but I mean, they are a community of interest, and I'm sure they have outreach to, where I'm sure Vandenberg Village, wherever their homes tend to be, just outreach and see if there's any neighborhood groups that do community activities. I mean, and that's probably a rule of thumb for all communities in Santa Barbara.
Commissioner Romero.
So thanks for your presentations. They're great, lots to think about. I just had a question in terms of timing of the message and saturation. There's a lot of competing interests. Everybody's has limited, mental capacity. We have this huge delay when we're actually going to have the data. So, one of the things that I worry about is going out there too early, doing education. Everyone's like, all right, I'm ready. There's no data. All right, I'm ready. We're not doing the math. Any recommendations how to bridge that gap and get that timing right, so that when everyone's peaking at the right time, when we have the data and the communities are really engaged to really get good feedback?
I'm going to break that up into two parts, Commissioner. First, the no data. Communities, when trying to identify communities of interest, you don't necessarily need data, not the census data per se. If you're talking about something that's a community of interest, you're not talking about something that's a district size of a district, right? So first of all, just keep that in mind. So you can still, first of all, to any parts of Santa Barbara, you can go and ask them, if Santa Barbara City is to be divided, what's the right dividing line? Why or why not? How many sections? How many neighborhoods are there in Santa Barbara City? Santa Maria, should it be whole or is it neighborhood based? All sorts of questions that can be asked that don't necessarily need a specific PL data need. If they happen to decide a neighborhood, and then when the data comes out, and when you as your body or your staff start putting maybe some figures into these communities of interest that you identify, and you start discovering what are actually large population communities of interest versus smaller communities, then it's a different story. Then you have to go back and do much more detailed potential VRA analyses. So I would then concur to Sarah's overall point of you can still collect stories right now, and you don't need PL data for that. And there's other data and stories, and this is when I teach about communities of interest, it's always about the community having to define themselves. You can always start early with that message. If you don't define yourselves now, we're going to define you for you, and we'll might do our best, but we're probably going to get it wrong if we don't know anything. I'm a demographer and I think I have the best intentions, and I divide things by accident all the time if I don't know information. That's why I partner with groups like AAJ and the Black Hub and many groups throughout the state because I want to know as much as I can to, at least so I know I don't accidentally do something. Redistricting is full of competing mandates, so not everyone's going to get a win, what they think is their win. But once you draw for equal population in the VRA, then it's, then you could do what you can afterwards. That's story based, and there's information that they can pull out on their own, ACS, other socioeconomic statistics, their history as they believe it. A Google map with a boundary, even, they don't need a population for that. So there's lots of ways that they can give you information.
Thank you.
Mr. McClintock.
This must be might be a difficult question, but when do you know when you've properly defined communities of interest? And maybe conversely, when do you feel like when do you know you've done a poor job of defining communities of interest?
Do you want to take it, Julia? Or
I'll take a stab, and I'll take a first stab. How's that? And then Julia. And it's back to what I just said a minute ago. It's not your job to define the community of interest. You as a commission, you are listeners right now. It is it is up to the community to define for you, to define themselves to you. So what I would say to you as a commission, if how you can outreach to these communities, particularly traditionally underrepresented communities or traditionally divided communities, how you outreach to them, that is probably how you should be measuring your success. And there is a component of, when you see it, there's a component after a while at the public input meetings, what the communities, they're going to trust me, the public will tell you what they don't like and do not like, mostly what they do not like. This is the kumbaya period right now for the most part. Before the minute you put out a map, I'm a redistrictor is a lonely job. So right now I think I would turn it back to you, Commissioner, and say, how do you feel you have outreach to different parts of Santa Barbara, and particularly the underrepresented? As you start getting your first feedback, you'll start getting a sense of, who is happy and who isn't and why. And then, then you're gonna have to decide, as you go through, again, the ranked criteria, how best you can satisfy as many as you can. Julia?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Being in listening mode is so important. And in that phase where you're getting community of input testimony, keeping tabs on, like, are you getting an equal or fair distribution of groups? Are you hearing from different communities? Are you hearing from different geographic areas? And then maybe doing some supplemental outreach if you feel like you're not getting a full enough range of voices in the room. But listening mode is the key point for that. And there might be moments where you want to kind of bolster some of the tips you're giving people about how to give COI. Like if you're not hearing enough actual concrete geographic areas, you can remind folks, thank you so much for telling us your story about your community. It really helps us to hear where your business district or community center or other reference points are, so we can make sure we're getting it right. So be listening, but you can be actively listening, And then another piece of it is, I think you're going to set up some online tools, so that can help with precision, because folks are actually going to draw for you where they feel like their community lives. So you'll get both the like verbal input, but also hopefully some mapped input. And then when you're putting the actual district maps together, that's when the feedback on whether you've captured the communities in those district proposals is going to be so important. And hopefully a lot of folks will turn out to let you know how they feel about it. And for that, I would recommend, putting out multiple variations on the maps, because sometimes it's easier to respond to proposals. And so if folks are seeing a couple different options, they can say, oh yeah, this one really speaks to my community and captured it right. whereas that one doesn't. And so if you have enough time in the process to really do some permutations and have a lot of input on the district drafts, as well as the kind of more open COI phase, that'll be important.
So one of your slides talking about the communities of interest, you had, there was a slide that had kind of two columns of examples, right? And one of them I think was more characteristic based, and the other was, I think you titled it, more policy based. That second group feels more challenging to me, right? Because it's going to be by definition more less geographic. Would be my suspicion, right? So, random example, you may have folks that are, their policy issue is pharmacy access, right? And those are probably not going to be adjacent communities because they're going to be your smaller, more diverse ones. How do you really get your head around these policy-based defined communities?
It's a good community of interest is multifaceted, as many elements as possible. That's certainly what I tell the community to tell their redistricting bodies, and that as many shared stories as possible. I describe communities of interest as they define themselves. As I define it, there's three components. There's what I call the qualitative, the quantitative, and then the boundary. The quantitative are a few things. Sometimes you can get some statistics, unemployment, income levels, all sorts of those types of things. And then there's the story. We have a farmer's market every Sunday, and everyone in the neighborhood is always going there. Or, there's a community festival every year that everyone rallies around. So there's lots of things. So what you, Chairman, what you just said is that's a constituency service potential issue, right? There's people who are going to say, we, if it's a city council redistricting, we have been lobbying for a stop sign on this intersection for so long, and we've not gotten it. We need to be together so we can lobby our city council member. And so there's that. So, and then I think the second part of how you wrap your things around it is a community of interest to me are like you make the Lego block. What's the Lego block you're molding? Basically the smallest piece you can make, you're not going to cut it up. It can go different places perhaps, but you're not going to cut it up, because cutting it up would be mean. Think of it that way. And the communities of interest are going to tell you what their boundary is, what their community is. And then they're going to tell you, and we prefer to be paired with this community of interest, this neighboring community, but not that one for X, Y, and Z, because we share these types of commonalities. So that might be the way to sort of wrap your head around things as well. There's the first level of like, keep us together. And the second request will be pair us with that group, but not that group. This group's okay, not that group, okay. And sometimes you can satisfy that, sometimes you can't, depending on the other big rules of redistricting, equal total population, and then compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. That's my take. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yep. So one quick follow-up. You just made an interesting comment there toward the end in your example about, groups providing feedback about, who they like and who they don't want to be associated with. Are those equally valid inputs from a community to say, our community would not like to be associated with community Y?
I mean, that is their opinion. That's how they're defining themselves. But it's a two-step. If I'm a community of interest, I'm advocating for my neighborhood to be kept together and then to be paired with in a certain way. And it's your job to see, can I satisfy that community? If I'm organizing a community that's very large, cohesive, and vocal, you're going to learn about my community, right? And it's up to you to see, can I satisfy them while still complying with federal voting, with equal population and the Federal Voting Rights Act. And some occasionally that comes in conflict, unfortunately. But many times it doesn't. So the example Sarah and Julia brought up about the Hmong community in Fresno, I remember that example because I worked with Advancing Justice LA, then APOL, on that, and they brought that community of interest to me as a MALDIF drawer to, hey, can you make sure that's COI is reserved, because there's a farm called Sunnyside Farms in Fresno, and it's a census designated place, but the boundary that the Hmong community defined was actually different than that farm designated place that the census drew. So it's like, all right, that's aware. All right, I can split that place a little bit because the community's telling me, and I can satisfy that. So it's about telling everyone and doing your best to satisfy what you can. And when you see it too, to some degree.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions or comments at this point? We'll give Mr. Bradley.
I'd like to piggyback on what Chair Morris asked about in terms of communities of interest that define themselves perhaps predominantly more in terms of what they are not than what they are. In terms of navigating the polemic and the process of outreach, when you're hearing from people within communities of interest, they might, let's say they give you 12 things that they're not and 2 things that they are, versus another interest group that can tell you 10 things they are and 2 things they are not. How would you weight that kind of polemic and how would you reconcile those sorts of interest groups in building a community of interest?
I've talked a lot. I don't know if Julia or Sarah want to take that one.
I can share a couple thoughts. I mean, in a way, it can just be a word choice thing rather than a substance thing. Like, a personal example, I currently don't have children, right? So that might indicate that school district dynamics aren't as important to me, or school funding isn't as important to me. So I could either phrase that as I live in a neighborhood with a lot of people who are pretty young and don't have children, or I could phrase it as, I live in a neighborhood where folks are really worried about affordable housing and job opportunities for young people, right? So I would try to kind of work your way through the word choice questions and try to see what the substance is that they're trying to tell you. I don't know if that's helpful. And when we're doing outreach around COI, we do primarily try to get folks to speak affirmatively about their experience and not focus on what they aren't. The first step is to get folks to tell their own story. And once they've done that, and once they've laid out where their neighborhood is and where their community is, then some of the follow-up questions are, what neighborhoods are similar to yours that are nearby? And then maybe what neighborhoods have slightly different interests? But we try to frame it in an affirmative way from the outset. Others, please feel free to chime in.
I would, all I would add is it's their definition, not yours. And I think it's more of an issue for you as a body if 2 different groups are saying 2 different boundaries. Now, if there's that community, if your hypothetical community, sir, is not competing with someone else's hypothetical community of interest, then I don't see much of a definition issue. But if there's 2 groups trying to define a certain community, then you may have to, you as a body may have to make a decision. Hopefully you urge the communities to work it out amongst themselves. And it's so it's about the map as well, with the boundaries of the COI.
And I'll just conclude by saying that, summarize and say that communities of interest are defined by the residents, but ultimately it's the commission's judgment call to weigh those communities against each other.
Well, thank you. Although this is not an action item tonight, I think we would be willing to take some feedback from the public if there are individuals that would like to make some comments to help inform this discussion. Ms. Tilton, I'll look to you to tell us whether anybody's taking us up on that offer.
Yes, we have a request from Andy Caldwell.
Good evening, Mr. Caldwell.
Hello, commissioners. I thought the presentations were excellent and give you a lot of food for thought. But I keep coming back. I hate to be a broken record. I keep coming back that all of this information is being uploaded into your brains, but you guys supposedly aren't the ones drawing the maps. And I think the more information they upload, I think the bigger your challenge of how do you digest this information and give it to the public so that they will know what the rules are to draw those maps when you've had, this is your third briefing, your third 1 to 2 hour briefing on these rules. And somehow though, the public's supposed to intuit this and hand over a map for you to judge. I've been a government watchdog for 30 years at the county level. And I've written 2,000 op-eds. Despite that, and most all of it having to do with county government, the most people I run into don't know what district they're in. They don't know who their county supervisor is. They don't know why they should care, and they don't know what difference it makes. And yet we're supposed to go from 0 to 100 and get them to draw a map based on legal and very important, but legal and in some cases, political, social, economic nuances. What I'm trying to say is I think this thing is backwards. I think you guys are getting that front loaded and you should be doing community outreach first and trying to get people, other people to come to these things and or be making these presentations to as many people as possible up front, and then fine tune it as you're getting toward the deadline. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Lata Murty, and that's the last hand I see raised.
Welcome back, Dr. Murty.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. I'm logged in on my phone this time. I really appreciated the presentations, particularly the very pragmatic suggestions given for outreach to various communities, but particularly Asian American communities. And so it made me think back to something I had mentioned in public comment at your last meeting, and it reinforced for me the importance of translation into different languages now, of the website, of the suggested outreach forms. And I think these are forms of outreach you could do now before the data is released, the census data, and before there's a point of saturation reached. If these materials that you already have could be translated, perhaps they are and I'm just not aware. But if they could be now, I think that would be a great service that the commission could do at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have, we just had another hand raised, Renee O'Neill.
Evening, Ms. O'Neill.
Well, I figured I'd give this a practice run. This is my first attending the Redistricting Commission, but I really appreciated listening to all the information presented by Julia, Stephen, and Sarah. Thank you guys so much, and excellent questions from the commissioners. I'm looking forward to attending more meetings. So I think Andy Caldwell has a valid point that maybe being part of some of the other county issues, I've witnessed cart before the horse before, and I would really like to discourage having that happen if at all possible. But I believe it was Commissioner, I can only see the first 2 letters of your name. It looks like Noah, maybe. Anyway, that said, what do we do if we inundate the communities with all of these different things now? Will that kind of just kind of go by the back by the wayside and maybe be forgotten down the road. But anyways, I think I was very, very happy to attend this meeting and look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for coming tonight.
And we have no more requests to speak.
Okay. Well, again, Sarah, Stephen, Julia, we appreciate your time this evening and look forward to engaging with you and your organizations as we move forward. So thank you again for tonight. Commissioner, I think that last.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. Commissioners, I think a couple of those comments from the public are a great segue to our next agenda item, which is an update on the work that's happening on our marketing materials. So Ms. Tilton, are you going to introduce this item again, or is Jennifer jumping straight in?
We met Jennifer at the last meeting, or actually I think a couple meetings prior, and so she is ready to go. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Welcome back.
Thank you very much. And let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. All right. Good evening, Chair Morris and commissioners. Can you see the screens okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And I apologize. Bear with me with my voice. I am getting over a cold, so I apologize. But as you mentioned, Chair Morris, I am really excited to be sharing this update this evening. I do think it is a great follow-up to a lot of the items that were raised in the previous presentation and some of the comments from our members of the public. So I'll share a brief update with you that does share a handful of significant and pretty exciting updates as far as the building blocks for where we're headed with outreach. So here's our agenda. I'll just run briefly through the large items of the marketing materials that we have in work. We will be addressing some of the other more nuanced items that came up this evening as well, but these are kind of the first essential building blocks that I want to make sure that this team has in place at this stage and where we are. So first, in terms of a new dedicated website, I know that this is something that the commission has been desiring for quite some time. Certainly very appreciative of the existing webpage that is up on the existing county site, but that did have its limitations in terms of the different features that you could enable and how much you could build it out, since it was one page on the overall county site. So we're excited to share that we got a green light from the county on April 29th to start working on a separate dedicated website just for redistricting. And it's looking like that URL will be drawsantabarbaracounty.org. We'll be developing that via WordPress with user friendliness and accessibility as the top two priorities. So again, kind of going back to some of the comments that came up today, it will have, I believe, dozens of translations available through a drop-down menu that people can select their preferred language, and all of the ADA compliance and everything built in there. We'll also plan on hosting resources that we'll be discussing later on this evening as well, including an informational video and a presentation that we'll be developing. And as additional materials are developed, whether it's flyers or other things that can be printed out and used across the community, those will be posted there under resources. And as far as next steps on the website, we are planning to share the first draft of that website with the outreach subcommittee by Wednesday, May 12th, for them to go ahead and take a look at. So we're excited about that. And then next up, we know that social media is a very important area to reach the diverse members of the county. And so we are working on establishing commission-specific accounts for Facebook and Instagram. And we've been in touch with the county PIO on this to understand what our parameters are in terms of moving forward with that. So we've gotten a green light again from the county, and we're working through that setup process with the outreach subcommittee, making sure we have all the right approvals in place. And we do expect to be up and running within the week on those accounts. And then moving forward, our team will develop weekly content for review and approval by the outreach subcommittee to share on those commission specific accounts, as well as the county accounts, assuming the county is open to sharing on those platforms. So through that two-pronged approach, we'll hope to reach as many stakeholders as possible. Obviously, the county accounts already exist now, so there's a bit of a built-in audience there, which is wonderful. But then through the commission accounts, we can post more frequently, gain a very targeted audience that's really specifically interested in redistricting. And we'll have it set up so that we'll be able to essentially have paid advertising via boosted posts in social media to reach people who might not just think to search for this or stumble across it. So that's where we are with social media. And next, we are working on an informational video. Trip Smith is working on an animated informational video currently in development. We received input and guidance from the Outreach Subcommittee on April 28th. And this video will be used for social media, since that's a very engaging format on social media, as we all know. And it'll be posted on the website on that homepage in multiple languages. And it can also be used for kicking off presentations. Captions will be available in multiple languages. So we're developing it in English first. And then once we have approval of the English version, we'll be able to translate that into Spanish and any other languages that the Outreach Subcommittee desires. And again, because we are planning to next touch base with the Outreach Subcommittee on May 12th, we're planning to share that draft video with them that day as well. And then our last item to update you on this evening is a presentation. And this is something we're working on for commissioners' use. So not only can it be a tool that can be posted to the website and printed off and used across the board, we specifically want to equip commissioners with this so that you can feel prepared to go out and conduct engagements across the community. And we're putting this together based on feedback and examples that the commission has shared that you've seen and you've liked in the past. And we've shared a draft already with the Outreach Subcommittee, and we'll work to finalize that English language version this week. And again, we'll work on translating the presentation, once approved in English, into multiple languages. So that concludes my presentation this evening. Again, those are the big building blocks that we want to make sure we have in place at this stage in the process. And of course, we'll be meeting with the Outreach Subcommittee every other week moving forward to continue to refine those items and develop and continue strategizing on the outreach moving forward. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you might have.
Commissioner McClintock, lead us off.
Thanks, Jennifer. This is all great stuff. Is the drawsantabarbaracounty.org website intended to be sort of our main point of contact with public over the web, or is there information on the county website that won't be on the drawsantabarbaracounty.org site?
Yeah, once it is live, the new website will be that main place. And so to your point, we will be moving everything that is on the existing county page over to the new website. And then there'll be something that points people from that old county page over to the new website in case they've gotten used to going there.
Thanks.
Commissioner Bradley.
Thanks very, very much, Jennifer. You mentioned, I believe that was Facebook and Instagram. This evening, our panel were telling us about WeChat and WhatsApp. Have you investigated those as well? And do you think they'd be right for our county?
Yes, we actually got that request already from Vice Chair Turley. So we have been looking into WeChat a good bit. And I believe that I had also seen the option of advertising on WeChat. And I will follow up and look into the channels that were discussed this evening as well. I will need to research that a little bit more and bring that back to the Outreach Subcommittee. But I love that idea.
Thank you.
One of the pieces you're working on, you mentioned there at the end, is the presentation that we can carry around with us and go to community organizations. What's your thought about how we start getting invitations and appointments at community organizations, civic groups, churches, neighborhood community? Will there be a tool on the website where people can request a speaker, and or do you anticipate some sort of an outreach effort to offer speakers to community organizations?
Yeah, we have definitely seen that in the past where we can have a request a speaker tab on the website. So that's something that we can plan on incorporating, and then people can fill out the online form and we can route it with the commission that way. And then I also think that we can incorporate it into things like our social media blasts that will be going out weekly and other content that gets publicized, so people can, if they don't, again, proactively go to the website and seek this out, then they can find out about it through social media and other formats. So both of those things that you mentioned, I think, can be part of our plan.
Right. I think I remember Mr. Caldwell last week inviting us to join his radio show. So put that one on the top of the list.
There we go.
Mr. Bray, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, just a reminder that in addition to that, I think we're all ambassadors for this effort. So we have our own networks, contacts and whatnot. So I think be mindful of that when this presentation is good. And it is really good. I mean, it's simple. It's not, so complicated that you can't get your head around. But yeah, just, in our circle of contacts, I think we need to be mindful of that, we're ready to go soon.
Okay. Any other quick comments, Ms. Tilton?
Yeah, so I just want to add that we have put most of all the puzzle pieces together to figure out the calendar to accommodate the 7 hearings pre-map and the 7 hearings post-map, as well as coordinating the deadlines of when we'll have the census data and the posting requirements and everything that's involved with that, plus meeting the mandate that we have varied times and varied days of the week. So we expect to have that on the next meeting, if possible, to do it after the commission discussion, so that we can get started and get those first public hearings out. Because I think that will satisfy a lot of the questions that were raised today about when do we start educating the public and the outreach. The first phase of the outreach is definitely that education process.
Right. Commissioner Olmedo.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. Thanks for the update, Jennifer. Maybe for the outreach subcommittee as well. And I feel like we're a little behind the 8 ball when we talk about like a little behind the power curve and collecting stories and starting to engage the community and getting these communities of interest. I know the thoughts are to have any mechanisms when we talk about the outreach, whether it's on the website or other things, WhatsApp or whatever, to be able to start to collect these stories, right? To kind of one place to, whether it's on the website or whatever, to have groups to be able to submit it and to have that maybe to start going and start identifying and really, have additional outreach. But I think beginning to collect those stories and those narratives, I think it's hugely important that we could be doing now. And I feel like we've just been a little bit distracted behind it, kind of going back to Mr. Caldwell's point. I think there's a lot of validity in that. And I think focused on those stories right now as much as we can using the data that we do have, I think could be critical. I'm just not sure if we have a mechanism for that or if that's something we could potentially look at.
I can take a step at that. So there is an option of a CIO form, community of interest form, that we can place onto the website. So I think what I'll do is just coordinate with NDC. Some of those questions may be repetitive with some of the map drawing tools that could be posted eventually. But if there's something that would be helpful, like you mentioned at this stage in the process, that we can go ahead and have up, I think that would be a great idea. So I'll take that for action with NDC.
I also just wanted to mention that I subscribe to the Santa Barbara Public Library email list, and they are working with CAUSE right now on a community story map or an asset map. I'm going to put it in the chat for the panelists, or actually I should put it in the chat for everybody. It seems very similar to what we're trying to do with communities of interest. So I would love to connect with both of those organizations about that. Specifically, they're mapping assets for the community and important places for the community. And it just seems like it would really be a good thing for us to connect with them on. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, and I think I'm sorry, just one caveat. I mean, other than just a form, with leveraging technology, whether that's collecting videos or things like that, or some type of visual narrative, other than just a form, I think would be critical.
Commissioner McClintock.
I was just going to say, Dr. Phillips and Doug Johnson are on. I don't know if there's anything they want to add to that with regard to, what Commissioner Olmedo is bringing up. Are there participatory mapping tools that are sort of ready to be in play to capture some of these communities of interest in forms of polygons and attributes? Are those tools ready to go, or what's the story? I know this is I'm beating a dead horse a bit, but what's the latest, Doug?
No, so the key thing that we need is all these tools are kind of data driven, and so they'll all have population data in them, even though they're estimates or whatever. So we're just nailing down those estimates, and then they'll be ready to launch. So we're close, but not quite there on the data. The technology side is definitely there. And then on the, once people submit their maps and their comments, all that can definitely be mapped. Those shapefiles then go into the story map that you've seen and the ArcGIS online map that underlies it, so that it'll be available. As someone scrolls around, they can look, select, community of interest and see what people have submitted so far. So, and to Commissioner Almeida's point, I think we don't have the technology to really capture and save the videos, but if people have videos that they've posted online to Facebook or YouTube or wherever, they can certainly send us a link, and that can be tagged into the geography. So we can do that as long as they post it somewhere, we can then link to it.
And I want to add that I believe on our meeting of the 19th, we'll be talking about those specific tools that'll be available. And there will be a simplified tool where people can draw their neighborhoods and submit it that way as well as they can submit, they can take, a Chamber of Commerce map or any other map and simply draw the boundaries to define their neighborhoods as well. And we'll be including all that information at these outreach meetings.
So, well, all due respect, I think, lots of us, I think everybody's been anxious to get to the, to the what of what we do. But I think if you look at what our next agendas are, we're right there, right? So our next meeting, we're going to go through the mapping tools so that people see those, the commissioners will understand how they know. So if you're out doing outreach, you can walk people through them. And then we're going to start talking about, these initial public hearings. I think it's interesting. All of the experts that have come and talked to us have said, you ought to do at least 4. And our ordinance requires us to do 7. So we're going to meet that box, check that box really quickly and go way beyond it. Right. And so that's what we've asked staff to do, is to kind of try to start putting together, what does that schedule look like, June till release of data, so that at that point, hopefully people are ready to submit maps when the data is available to use to draw those maps, because once we kind of narrow it down, we're then obligated to go out and do 7 more hearings before we take any final votes. So the compression on the timepiece is going to be post maps, right? Getting 7 of them in late October and November is going to be interesting. Don't plan a lot of vacations for the fall. Ms. Tilton, do we have anybody from the public that wants to share some insight on this item?
We have 3 hands raised. We have Andy Caldwell, followed by Darcel Elliott.
So Caldwell, you've got the trigger finger going quickly tonight.
Chair Morris, members of the board. Doug, I'm hoping Doug Johnson can correct me on this. Because I work for a broad coalition, I'm always trying to think in terms of synergy. And plus I'm a one-man show, so I have to think in terms of synergy. If I am correct, the cities that are divided by districts are going to be going through the same process. And I'm wondering whether or not you guys should coordinate with the cities, because if you get people showing up from community neighborhoods within a city, that might help you define communities of interest for the county. Now, in other words, the cities are going to have to be doing some kind of outreach themselves. And the question is the event could be co-sponsored, and it's like help pick your city councilman and help pick your county supervisor kind of thing, or at least the boundaries of the district, where you might be able to get more people that way and drill down to different levels, because I'm sure that the city council people that represent those districts will spearhead redistricting effort at that city level or the district level. So I think if you look to create synergy, I don't think it would confuse the people, at least for the initial outreaches on how to draw these maps. And then maybe somebody can explain, and this is what, like I said in the previous comment, it's always been difficult for me to explain. People say the county doesn't matter to me because I live in a city, and they do not know that the county is the largest government agency in this region. It's bigger than all the cities combined, and that most of the services that they offer are countywide. So I think that if you can start educating people on what the county is, on what it does, and then how it interrelates with the cities, I think that'll get more people interested in what you're doing and why it's so important.
And Chairman Morris, I would say, just on that idea, the basic idea, totally agree with. I think we mentioned we're already planning to borrow the community of interest data that the state redistricting commission collects, and certainly we'll share back and forth with all the cities. We do suggest not combining hearings, though, mainly for the idea of like solving when they hold a hearing for their city council districts, they don't want a bunch of people from Santa Maria and Santa Barbara showing up to talk about the county. So agree 100% on the collecting data and sharing all of our data back and forth. Just it doesn't work so well to try to combine a hearing.
Doug, isn't the timeline for the Santa Barbara City redistricting also very different from ours?
I don't remember if they have a primary election or not. I think they're just November. Oh no, you're right, because they don't have a 2022 election at all. Right. Yep. So yeah, the timelines are all over the place. Most cities have an April deadline and all that. I think Mr. Caldwell was talking more about just the community of interest collection piece, and certainly we can coordinate that. But you're exactly right. The mapping is going to be happening at all different times.
The next speaker is Spencer Brandt, followed by Lata Murti.
Evening, Mr. Brandt.
Good evening, Chair Morris and commissioners. I just wanted to speak to say really a great job, and thank you to those that are serving on this outreach committee who have piloted or put forward these different ways of doing outreach and really put their heads together to think about that. I think you're really on the right track with that. This is some area where I actually have some amount of expertise as a graphic designer, web designer, and videographer. I'm very familiar with these types of marketing materials and putting them together. And I will say, if there's one thing that I have learned in my probably almost a decade at this point of doing those different things, is that distribution of those materials matters more than the actual product a lot of the time. So I really implore the outreach committee to really think hard about how there's going to be a distribution plan for things like this. And I encourage you to look to the Census Complete Count Committee's strategies in Santa Barbara County. If you look at what they were able to do, not just here in the county, but I think across the state, there were similar committees in different parts of California that really engaged community-based organizations, nonprofits, health clinics, housing providers, everyone that you can imagine to try and get the message out through their different channels of communication. And I think for what we see in the preliminary census numbers, just state by state, it seems like that worked really well. So I really encourage you to think long and hard about that and to really put a lot of effort into that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lata Murti, and that's the last hand that I see raised.
Good evening again, Dr. Murti.
Good evening. I have a lot to say this evening. I really appreciate the presentation made, as it, I think, more than adequately addresses a lot of the concerns I brought up. I do have a question, though, and I apologize if this was addressed in earlier meetings or information and I missed it. What is the outreach subcommittee, and who is serving on it? If we in the public may know.
Yep, absolutely. We appointed a subcommittee of the commission to work with our with the vendors so that we could make decisions more quickly. And that committee, I believe now is Vice Chair Turley, Commissioner Bray, and Commissioner Rios are the members of that committee. All right, folks. Jennifer, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys jumping in and going to work quickly and engaging with our team to get these materials together. If it wasn't already obvious to you, tonight's discussion should make clear that there's a real pent-up demand for what you're working on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, folks. Item number 8, discussion and direction of reassigning Commissioner Olmedo from at-large to the 3rd District position and establishing a process for appointing a candidate from the applicant pool to fill the at-large position. As you will recall from the minutes of our meeting, from our last meeting, we had made some preliminary decisions around this process and had asked staff to do some outreach for us to help us define a pool of candidates. Ms. Tilton, can you share the results of the polling?
Yes, so we reached out to, I believe there were 13 prospective candidates, and we have 6 who are interested. And so they are all available for the next meeting, which we scheduled for for April 12th.
May.
I'm sorry, May 12th. May 12th. And would you like me to share the graphic?
Yeah,
Is that helpful?
If you've got that convenient, that'd probably be helpful.
Okay. So what you're seeing here, the green screen, the green individuals are the ones who are interested.
Okay. So
there were 11 total.
Yep. So just commissioners, keep that in mind as we think about how we're going to do this. But before we talk about it, I think we'll go in reverse order this time and invite input from the public and any advice they care to give us about this decision. So, Ms. Tilton, anybody volunteering to help us think this through?
Yes, we have a caller, area code. I'm sorry, it's the phone number ending in the 4 digits, 8203.
Good evening. Can you identify yourself and make your comment, please?
Hello, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. This is Charles Bell. I had previously spoken during the public comment section. Can you hear me?
We can, sir.
Thank you. You have before you a letter that I submitted in April, and which was presented to you today, along with a representation of that letter dated April 21st. My client is the California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce. I will not go through my letter in detail, but the essential points that I would like to make, and we made 2 alternative recommendations for you. First recommendation was to fill the existing vacancy with the 1 current Hispanic remaining in the initial qualification pool who actually resides in that district, Mr. Lupe Alvarez. And the second was, if that decision were not made, to redesignate Commissioner Olmedo, who currently serves as at-large as a District 3 Commissioner, and then fill the open at-large with one of the qualified Hispanic persons whom we identified, either Mr. Alvarez, Ms. Harden, or Mr. Martinez. I did not participate in your meeting last time, but I understand that that was not the direction that at least the second part of our alternative number 2 that your commission was discussing. I think there are problems with that. First, the basic problem is underrepresentation of Hispanic Latinos on the commission, which exists and has persisted really since the outset of the appointment process. We raised that issue in our December letter. It was partially addressed, but not completely addressed. And it's really founded in the provision of Section 4H3 of the ordinance, which says that the six appointees shall be chosen to ensure that the commission reflects the county's diversity, including racial, ethnic, geographic, age, and gender diversity. So here we're focusing on ethnic diversity. The second aspect of that is the commissioner shall also consider political party preference. And here what you had proposed to do is really to put political party preference ahead of the more specific shall in that, ensuring county diversity. Now, I think the problem with the approach that you're taking is that Section 4J1C3 directs you, if a vacancy occurs, to select the remaining members from the pool of the most qualified applicants previously selected by the county commissioner. So you cannot go outside of the qualified applicant pool, and you use the criteria then in 4H3 previously mentioned. And so we believe that while there is a disparity also among Democrat members from a partisan standpoint, that the underrepresentation of Hispanics would not be alleviated. It would persist. It has persisted from the outset. And we're not hostile to the partisan issue. We suggest that you would identify for future appointment persons who are within the qualified applicant pool who are affiliated as Democrats for the next appointment. But we believe that not only is the ordinance, the guidance, and the strongest point here in the direction that we suggest, but also that there are federal laws and state laws, including the Voting Rights Act, which come into play if you do not do so. So, again, I would recommend our approach and not the one that was preliminarily discussed last time when we were not present, and I appreciate your consideration of it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry, the next speaker, Andy Caldwell, followed by Lee Hiller.
Chair Morris, members of the board, our commission. Tell you the truth, I'm somewhat aghast. You just heard your third presentation on the Voting Rights Act, which is the supreme law of redistricting, federal law. And you've known from the start you were underrepresented with Latinos from the very start. And at least the North County, the entire North County is majority minority Latino population. And it's the largest part of the county. And I don't understand why you would pick, and this is what you're doing. You are picking party over minority. You're picking party over minority. And what Chuck Bell just mentioned, and I don't know where your council, how they're going to weigh in on this. The ordinance says you shall ensure minority representation on the commission reflects the population, while you're only required to consider party. So it shall ensure versus merely consider. And I'm going to lay this out because just in plain English. You blow off the Latino representation on your commission. How do you reach out effectively to the Latino community? Because we will make, it's already been known, Bobby Mercado who I had nothing to do with this letter, already put an op-ed into the Santa Maria Times today that you guys are blowing off Latino representation, including the former mayor of Guadalupe. And so when you talk about community of interest, we have to ask you, how interested are you in the community? This is just flat out wrong. In other words, a former mayor, Latino, in a minority community gets rejected because you'd rather have a white Democrat? That's what your choice is, white Democrat versus our Latino. The difference between shall ensure versus consider, all in the name of pursuing the Voting Rights Act. Do the work on your commission. Choose your commission like you're going to choose these lines. I didn't write the Voting Rights Act. Third presentation, this thing's supposed to be overall everything. Shouldn't it also be guiding who's on your commission? The Board of Supervisors blew up when Joe Holland picked 5 white people to be this initial commission. They blew up. And now you guys are following suit when you have a rule that says you shall ensure versus merely consider. How do you defend that to the public? I'm at a loss. Even though I could fill 3 minutes, I'm still at a loss at what you're doing or what you're planning to do here. Thank you.
The next speaker is Lee Heller, followed by Spencer Brandt.
Good evening, Ms. Heller.
Chair Morris and commissioners, good to see you all. I'm relieved to see that you have a number of people still interested in serving because there was some concern about melt. I'm a little astonished by the hypocrisy of the previous speakers who were prepared to sue this commission when Republicans were underrepresented, and emphasizing the importance of partisan representation. Sorry, I have dogs chasing a cat. Yet now are not reflecting the fact that the law specifically articulates that you need to have partisan representation. Ms. Orden went over this at great length at the last meeting, which apparently Mr. Bell did not hear, or he would understand what the legal analysis was. So bottom line is, unfortunately, the way Mr. Holland picked the original pool of 45 leaves us severely short of the kind of diversity that is needed. But you've got to work with the pool that you have because that's the way the ordinance was written. And as Ms. Orden went over last time, this requires some partisan representation. Democrats are significantly underrepresented. I said this last time and I'll say it again. I don't want this commission's whole effort to be overturned by a lawsuit because the commission makeup doesn't reflect the requirements of the ordinance. So you have a good pool of 6 to work with. I wish there was racial diversity. This is something that can't be undone. So we've got to work with the ordinance as it is and look at the people that you have available to interview and make the best of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next speaker and the last hand raised is Spencer Brandt.
Welcome back, Mr. Brandt.
Hey again, commissioners. Good to see you again. I don't really think that it needs to be said, but I'm going to say it anyway. I encourage you not to take legal advice from people that are actively suing you and don't want to see this commission's efforts succeed. Because I think that's what we're hearing tonight. And I think it's really unfortunate. There were over 200 people that applied for this commission. And that list got whittled down by a black box formula that we'll never know exactly what it was. It's not to say that all of you that made it through are not eminently qualified. You are. There are also many other eminently qualified folks that you're not allowed to go back out to and not allowed to consider as well. And that is really unfortunate. The bottom line with the decision that you're faced with, I think you're moving in the right direction, considering moving over Commissioner Olmedo to make sure that this commission does reflect the partisan makeup within our county so that it can move forward with that trust in the community. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And we had another hand raised, Kira Solis. or Kyra Solis.
Good evening, Ms. Solis.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my name is Kira. I don't know if anyone else here that has commented is also Latina, but I just want to point out that a lot of this discussion is really lumping our community into a monolith, and that, you know, it's coming from majority Republican areas, and that also, you know, party rep matters too. And it seems like it's a little hard to hear me, and I don't know how to fix that. I'm sorry.
Okay, we're getting the gist.
Yeah,
We're
thank
getting
you.
Go ahead. We can hear enough of what you're saying to understand.
Oh, okay, yeah. All I was saying is that a lot of this discussion seems to be really lumping North County into like a monolith of Latinx, the Latinx community, and that like also we are here in South County, and you know, we also are not just Republicans, which is what is being seemed to be suggested by repeatedly mentioning like Guadalupe and other things. So just also keeping that in mind, because party rep matters too. Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. Any other speakers?
I see no other hands raised. Oh, I'm sorry. We did get Renee O'Neill. Renee O'Neill.
Just under the wire, Miss O'Neill.
I'm sorry, I wasn't going to weigh in, but I think I will. I believe in being the initial part of this process in the selection, I would really shout to hope, or hope to shout, that every commissioner that is serving here understands the responsibility of their role to represent the greater community in all demographics. I don't personally, as speaking for myself, white, Democrat, middle-aged, or maybe I'm considered senior citizen now. I don't want to accept that, but you know what? I have a heart for all the people in Santa Barbara County, and I don't look at myself as someone who's going to go, oh, geez, because I'm white or this or that. I'm not going to make decisions based on what is in the best interest of the population of our county. And I think, I don't know, but I think that if you were chosen and selected on this commission, there's probably a pretty good chance that the way you answered questions, the way you responded to what responsibilities you would be faced with, or we would be faced with, I think you wouldn't be on this commission if you were someone who was going to be extremely biased. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm naive. Andy would probably tell me, she doesn't know what she's talking about. But anyways, I think you're doing a great job so far. And I don't know, after listening to this meeting tonight, if I might change my mind about being one of the ones that might be selected. Just kidding. I'll try to do my best in whatever way I can, but I'm also open to having diverse representation on the committee in however that can best serve you guys. That's what's the bottom line. All righty. Have a good night.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
And we have a request from Lata Murti.
Dr. Murti.
Here I am again. Thank you. I'm listening to the other public comments and remembering my initial concerns when the commission was being selected, that there be representation and diversity of the major racial and ethnic groups within the county. And I would just like to say, I believe all along there has been a good faith effort to make sure that is the case in this commission. And so I appreciate and support the process that that you are undertaking now of moving Commissioner Olmedo to the 3rd district vacancy, and then interviewing those that you have listed from the pool of 40 or 45 selected, and proceeding forward. So I just wanted to express my support.
Thank you. Okay, let's bring this back to the commission now. you know, Ms. Orden, I'm going to get I want to put a button in this to the extent we can. You know, maybe let's start by, well, I'll share my personal opinion. I think this ordinance is written in a very challenging way. There is a lot of ambiguity in the way that the ordinance was drafted. Words matter, and unfortunately, they were maybe not chosen with enough specificity in the drafting of this ordinance. Be that as it may, as was said earlier about the pool, we must work with what we have. So we're trying to do our best in that regard. You know, as I look at this particular decision, right, I'm drawn to 4JC3, which specifically addresses vacancies. And I'm drawn to the second sentence, which says, to the extent practical, replacement commissioners shall be selected to maintain the balance of district representation and political affiliation that existed prior to the vacancy. I acknowledge that in the first sentence, it refers us back to the original criteria, where there's a lot of confusion about prioritization of conflicting criteria. You know, I think you can make the case either way. I think you could make a good argument that we need more minority representation on this panel. I think you could make the case that the folks who wrote this also intended to put their thumb on the scale for political party representation. I think that was, as I try to read this and understand what they intended, that leans out to me. I don't know that I agree with it, but it is, right? So, you know, Ms. Warren, I don't know if there's a question in there, but any, you know, and I know you're probably not in a position to give us a definitive answer, but to the best of your ability, what is your advice for the commission at this moment with this decision?
I know from our last meeting, desperately want to honor both sides of this. You want to honor what they're saying, which is, to the extent practical, the replacement commissioner shall be selected to maintain the balance of district representation and political affiliations. It also has shall, when it says you shall select a replacement commissioner from the pool of the most qualified applicants previously selected by the county elections using the criteria in 4H3. What's that criteria? And we read through this last time, and the criteria, and remember, some of the criteria is not even in question here. The appointees shall be chosen based on relevant experience, analytical skills, ability to be impartial. That's the shall. What it says, the 6 appointees shall be chosen based upon relevant experience, analytical skills, and the ability to be impartial. Then there's a comma. And then the comma says, and to ensure that the commission reflects the county's diversity, including racial, ethnic, geographic, age, and gender diversity. And then it even goes further to weaken it by saying, however, formulas or specific ratios shall not be applied for this purpose. I think you're right, Chair. You can argue it either way. And the fact that they talk a lot more about the political partisanship, the parties, it sounds as if in the minds of the drafters here for the ordinance, they thought it had some primacy. Was it 60-40? Was it 49-51? It would have been perfect if they had written it the exact same way in both sections, and then you'd say it was 50-50 and you go with your heart. I think you just you recognize exactly what you've been asked to do by this ordinance, and you're trying to make your very best judgment. Do I think that I could defend for you either side of that argument? I don't think it's a frivolous argument that's being made. So I think, you know, we could say just what you said. There's ambiguity here. But I think the weight is on the side of the partisanship by the way it's drafted.
Thank you. So commissioners, the agenda item is to determine what we're doing to replace, to fill an open seat on the commission. So I'm going to open it up for somebody to suggest a path forward. We know what we agreed to do last week. We could move forward with that and talk about scheduling and process. Or so if somebody wants to propose an alternative, we could take that. Mr. Bradley and then Ms. Twibell.
I think that one of the things we want to safeguard against, and I've said this before, is kind of patronizing and tokenizing of ethnicity and race. I don't think that we should pick people unless they're qualified to do the job. And when it coincides, you know, as you said, Chair Morris, the partisanship here probably weighs most heavily. And but first and foremost, we need people who are qualified. I would, I'm not saying that Lupe Alvarez, who's been put forth multiple times over the months, is not qualified, although I do have concerns about conflicts of interest. But we have not, and I hate to put him on the spot, we have not heard from our fellow commissioner, Ben Olmedo. My feeling is that as our commissioner at large, if anything, he's in a best position to oversee our Latino community throughout the county because he does represent all of our 5 districts. He is able to get in touch with all 5 districts. And I'm wondering if he'd be best left where he is as our at-large member in order to make sure he can maintain contact with all of our communities. But I would also like, if he wishes, I hate to put you on the spot, Ben, but if you don't mind, sir, if you could give us some of your thoughts about where you think you'd be most effective on our commission.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Bradley. Yeah.
Ben, while you think about your answer, let me get Commissioner Twibell's comment, and then we'll come to you next.
Well, first of all, I believe that aren't we each supposed to represent the whole county? I mean, we're chosen from our districts, but I mean, I've reached out to people in District 4. I know a lot of people in a lot of the different districts. And so my goal is to outreach to everybody in the county. And the only reason I would want Commissioner Olmedo to move to District 3 is so that we have a bigger pool to choose from. And I do believe that, well, the way I read it, and people keep saying replacement, so I'm thinking we replace with a Democrat because that's a Democrat left. So we're just staying the same. We're not really changing anything. That's all.
Commissioner Olmedo.
Yes, sir. I mean, to some extent, I think a lot of the concerns is somewhat of a false narrative, right? Because we're supposed to be outreaching the community. We're supposed to do communities of interest. We've got a lot of different representation, even though it's less than ideal. Maybe does not completely, meet the statutes. And we started off with a deficit, one hand tied behind the back. I'm willing to serve wherever I'm needed to serve. It's kind of my background, kind of shut up and color in the military. But if I had a choice, I do feel like I can probably serve the best as at-large commissioner, because that technically, even though, yes, we all represent the county, we're all kind of slotted into these different where we're supposed to focus areas, right? So I do have a lot of contacts, not forget about Guadalupe or North County, everywhere. I have contacts kind of everywhere, I think it's, very happy to serve as at-large candidate. I do feel this is probably the place where I can be most effective, and if we're going to go towards partisanship, and the statutes requiring we have a Democrat in place, so who's left, we have to replace with the Democrat, that is, an important criteria regardless of anything else. I think qualifications are important. Again, there's lots of people within the county that can help out, right? This is just representative making decisions. We're supposed to take in input from the community, so I mean, a lot of it I think is just distracting, because we're supposed to go out there, and do the outreach, do the education. So like I said, I'm going to go wherever the consensus of the commission takes me. I do believe I can best serve, as the at-large commissioner.
So thanks for that, Commissioner Olmedo. I would just point out, if you go back to that grid, and maybe Ms. Tilde, if you could throw that back on the screen, that determination, Commissioner Olmedo, changes our path dramatically. If you remain in the at-large seat and we're only selecting from District 3, we have one volunteer. So it's quicker. It's a shorter path to success. If you switch to District 3 and we can go to the larger pool, I think we've got 6 or 5. I think we had one that changed on us late this evening. So
6 that counted that.
yeah, so so it does matter on whether we're pulling a whole nother meeting together a week from tonight to do 6 interviews, or if we're doing 1, A, we may not need a meeting, and B, we could probably do it on top of our agenda. So anyway, it does change the path. Commissioner McClintock, you had a comment.
Well, just a question for Ben. You said that you feel like you'd be most effective in your current position at large. How is it that you would be less effective in the other position?
So that's a good question. So one, I think, is just a focus, right? So if I'm going to be District 3 commissioner, I'm really going to focus on District 3, right? So that does include Guadalupe, right? Some of the other ones, doesn't include some of the other outlying counties, Cuyama and things like that, and some other, there's lots of different representation in there. So I guess it's just one of scope, but like I said, I am willing to serve, right, wherever I'm needed. I think either way, right, if there's an at-large commissioner, I've done a little bit of work, laying groundwork, we're still working together, right? So I mean, I think that's really good, insightful question, sir. So that's just I think when it comes down to the outreach and stuff, it's just a difference of focus. So
for better or worse, at least for the next several months, Guadalupe is in District 3 too, so you cover that. Commissioner
correct,
Turley.
sir. Yeah, so
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think that as one of the younger commissioners, it is important to remember that we're also trying to target age demographics. And the only commissioner under 50, or the only possible person that we would be interviewing under 50, is in District 5. So that's something to consider. But I do think that if we do want to respect Ben's preference of staying at the at-large position, it probably would make sense to offer an interview both to Lupe Alvarez and Kevin Kasef as a show of goodwill, I suppose.
That's an interesting idea, and I don't think it's a bad one. And then you make a decision based on what you hear in the interviews, as opposed to what we think we know based on pieces of paper, right?
Yeah, I think the other thing that I want to add is I'm just hopeful that regardless of who's chosen for this position, we can move forward as a united front with the optimistic support from our community, that our main goal here, which we've mentioned before, is to help them to fairly draw the lines. So us picking commissioners doesn't mean that we're going to be drawing the lines. And that is, I think, what we should be keeping the focus on, and their support in this publicly is really helpful in maintaining the trust in our community going forward, that they have that power.
Mr. Bray.
Thank you, Chair Morris. I've been very concerned about the lack of Latino representation on our commission, and particularly Guadalupe. And so I was struggling with how do we resolve this? And I got to tell you, I think Commissioner Turley hit upon a pretty decent idea. in that we bring both candidates in and interview them. Let the chips fall where they may.
Mr. Bradley.
I'm not sure, why we wouldn't perhaps want to go ahead and hear from all of our Democratic candidates. I mean, there are 6 of them, but it may be best if we decide that Kevin Kassoff, for example, is someone that we would not wish to appoint to the commission to represent D3, then we're going to have to go back to asking Commissioner Almeida to consider possibly going to D3 and looking at other options. I'm not sure why we wish to paint ourselves into a corner at the outset here with sort of a false dichotomy of either force outing a pick for D3 through Kevin Kassoff or selecting Lupe Alvarez. I'd like to see it broadened a bit more than that if we have to make that many choices. We also have to bear in mind that this is going to change throughout our commission. We may have other members who resign, and we're going to face the situation again. So we probably would save ourselves time by finding out now when we can, when it's expedient to talk with all of our candidates to see, the people that we who are willing to work with us and to learn more about their qualifications. So I would recommend, if anything, interview all of our Democratic candidates.
So building on that, Ms. Tilton or Mr. Johnson, could you remind us how many Hispanic candidates remain in the pool? Mr. Bell mentioned named 3. Are there others?
I mean,
We have 2 Latino Republicans.
well, yeah, 3 if you include Jennifer Harden, but she's withdrawn herself. So,
okay, so there are 2 that have not previously withdrawn from consideration, and those are the only 2 Hispanics of any political persuasion left in the pool.
Correct.
That is correct.
Obviously, there are no Democrats, or we wouldn't be talking about this. And there are no party preference or declined to states that are that identify as Hispanic as well. Is that correct?
That's correct. There were just 2 Latinos remaining.
So perhaps building on Commissioner Bradley and Commissioner Turley's original suggestion, maybe we do all of the Democrats and all of the Hispanics, right? So that takes you from 6 to 8 interviews. I think, Ms. Trotsky, did you have your hand up? And then Mr. Almeida.
I did, thank you. I appreciate all of the discussion, but I'm curious if we're focusing on a commissioner from District 3, why would we be interviewing people that aren't in District 3? And I would need a clarification on that.
Well, I think it's just to Mr. Bradley's point, it keeps the option open that we always can move Ben into that from District 3 seat. And I take Ms. Twibell's point that we should all be representing everybody. And then that gives you more options. That's all it does, is it broadens it. Go ahead.
I think it's important to send a message to the North County and to especially Guadalupe that we are hearing them and that we are sensitive to their representation and their voice. So I would like to see them heard.
Very good. Mr. Romero.
Yes, to follow up on Commissioner Chalk's, I mean, to give us the best opportunity there, I mean, I think it makes the most sense for me to move to District 3, right? It would also represent the Guadalupe, right? And then it gives you the most wide options to interview the candidates, to focus on the people that are most well qualified and who would be a good fit for the commission. That, just looking at the requirements, I mean, I think that makes the most sense, and I'm willing to do that.
Ms. Turley?
Yeah, I just want to remind the commissioners that Janet Rios has a lot of ties to Guadalupe, and she has a lot of experience with that community. So we do have some fantastic representation already on the commission for Guadalupe, although I would never say no to more.
Mr. Johnson, I see you ready to say something.
Well, you may have passed by this too, but the thought when you suggested all the Dems and the two Latinos, I'd probably add into the mix there Kevin Ilak, who's our only remaining Asian American candidate in the pool too.
Okay.
If you were going to go that approach. So.
You know, at this point, if we're spending 15 minutes each, you know, an hour and a half, adding another 45 minutes to the conversation to the evening. Okay. Mr. Bradley.
Are we ready to make a motion?
Sure, but we can always take a motion and then wrap it from there.
I would like to motion that we interview our 6 remaining Democratic candidates, our 2 Republican Latino candidates, and also Mr. Kevin Elak.
Well, is there a second to that motion? Ms. Turley, are you seconding?
I'd like to second with amendment that we have already interviewed Kevin Elak. So in similar fashion to how we considered other applicants' interviews during a second round, I would suggest that we all just go back and revisit his wonderful interview again.
So we would consider Mr. Elak, but not interview. Very well. Ms. Twyebell, I think I saw your hand up. You good? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Mr. Bradley, are you okay with that amendment?
Yes, so amended. And just to remind us that our primary goal here is to find people who are best qualified. We have a very good team now, and let's keep the best people we can get as our top priority.
That seems like a good place to then call for a vote. Ms. Tilton, could you take us through a roll call, please?
Yes, Commissioner Trotsky,
Aye.
Commissioner Twyebell,
Aye.
Commissioner McClintock,
Aye.
Vice Chair Turley,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Bray,
Aye.
Commissioner Ochoa,
Aye.
Commissioner Olmedo. I don't think the response was audible. Commissioner
Aye.
Olmedo?
Aye.
And Chair Morris?
Did you get it?
Aye.
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so that
Motion
carries.
carries.
Okay, so that leads us to discussion to item 9, which is the next agendas. So we had tentatively put a hold on the 12th to meet to do the interviews. Given the number, I think that is going to be necessary. I don't think we can add this to the other items that we've got on our agenda for the 19th. And if I also recall at our last meeting, there was some concern about the time frame, and the 12th gets us closer to meeting the requirement there. A couple of you, I think, had mentioned that a little later start next week would be helpful. So I think we'd set for 7 o'clock. Is that still an acceptable approach for everybody? And that would be the only agenda item at this point. On the 12th would be the interviews and selection of a new commissioner. Is that okay? Ms. Turley?
Yeah, I would just like to, I don't even know if I need to add this to the next agenda or just mention it, but I was wondering if there is a way to translate the agendas into Spanish when we send them out.
I'm sure staff could take a look at that and figure it out. Take a note on that. So then that would take us to the 19th, where I think, Mr. Johnson, the plan is to do the mapping tools as the primary agenda item. Commissioner McClintock is very excited for that evening. He's got it starred on his calendar now.
Jared, we'd add though, we'll likely have a big discussion about the outreach schedule of that meeting too.
Very good. Okay. And that would then start to get us ready for commissioners. We're thinking about a change in pattern for meetings in June, starting in June. And the general idea that we've been talking about with staff is maybe going to one official commission meeting each month, and using the other slot for some of the community hearings, outreach sessions. So, but we'll confirm that on the 19th as we go through that part of our program. Is there anything else that you all would like to add to a future agenda? All right. Our last item on the agenda this evening is we do have an item to take up in closed session. Ms. Orden, do you want to just announce what that item is? And then we will adjourn to closed session. For those of you in the public, if you choose to stay with us, we will leave this room open and we will return to announce the results of the closed session, if any, at the end of the evening.
Yes, there has been a filing by the Coalition of Labor, Agriculture, and Business, actually a refiling of the same issue against the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors, this commission, and also the firm Strumwasser and Wucher. And we would like to discuss that filing, and it has not yet been served. And we will be talking about whether this commission wishes to accept service.
And Ms. Tilton, I make sure I don't get off track. I probably need to allow for some public comment before we disappear. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Is there anyone wishing to avail themselves?
We do have a request from Andy Caldwell.
Welcome once again, Mr. Caldwell.
Hi there. I don't know if she will answer this question. I don't understand what your attorney meant when she says wishes to accept service.
Sure. There are two ways in which a party becomes part of the lawsuit. And one way is by having a service, a process of service directly in person or by mail. And other than that, they ask if you will just accept it by email or whatever without going through that process. A lawyer for the commission can't do that without talking to the client. So it's a client conversation about that.
Any other comments, Ms. Tilton?
I see no other, yes, I see no other requests to speak. I think Andy Caldwell just spoke. Okay.
Very well. Commissioners, you should all have received again the second link that is for the closed session. We will stand adjourned and reconvene in closed session momentarily.
Sorry.
No worries. Okay, we are back on the record. We'll call the meeting back to order. And Ms. Orton, would you report any actionable results from our closed session?
Yes, at the conclusion of the closed session, an action was taken and I was instructed to accept service of the complaint as noted before. And I will do that.
Very well. Ladies and gentlemen, anything good of the order? Not, thank you all for being with us. To the public, thank you for hanging in with us on a longer session again this evening. We will reconvene in 1 week at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, May the 12th. For tonight, we stand adjourned. Thank you all for the
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.